What if everything you were taught about what happens after death was only half the truth? What if the way your body is treated when you die could determine whether your soul escapes or remains trapped in the lower realms? For centuries, humanity has followed sacred funeral traditions, burial, cremation, embalming, without ever questioning where those customs truly came from. But beneath these rituals lies a belief so ancient, so forbidden, that it was erased from almost every holy text. The Gnostics knew it. The ancient Egyptians hinted at it. And some mystics still whisper about it today, that the soul's journey after death depends not on faith or prayers, but on the very matter in which the body is bound. Imagine this. You die, and as your loved ones mourn, your spirit hovers above, watching what they do with your body, to bury, to burn, to preserve. Each act is more than symbolic. Each choice sets the soul on a different path, either toward liberation or toward the hands of the archons, the cosmic wardens of illusion who feed on trapped spirits. But few ever learn which path leads to freedom. Why was this knowledge hidden? Why did the Church replace the old teachings about the body and soul with new dogmas that no longer matched the original mysteries? And what did the Gnostics know that made their writings so dangerous, so threatening, that entire libraries were destroyed to silence them? In this video, we'll uncover the forbidden Gnostic belief that reveals what truly happens when the body dies, and why your choice between burial or cremation might decide the fate of your soul. Before we open these ancient mysteries, take a moment to subscribe and join this channel of seekers who dare to look beyond the veil. Here, you'll find not dogma, but discovery, not fear, but understanding. Because only by remembering the forgotten truths can the soul awaken to its freedom. When we speak about death, we often think of it as the ultimate end, a return to dust, a rest, a goodbye. But to the ancient Gnostics, death was not an ending at all. It was the moment of liberation or imprisonment. And how that moment unfolded depended greatly on what happened to the body. Burial, as we know it today, was not always the natural or divine way to treat the dead. It was, according to many ancient texts, a ritual engineered by earthly powers to keep the soul tied to matter, to the demiurge's domain. In Gnostic cosmology, the material world is not the creation of a loving, all-knowing God, but of a lesser being, the demiurge, who shaped this world to trap divine sparks in flesh. The archons, his servants, guard this illusion. They are the gatekeepers of the heavens, ensuring that souls, once freed from their bodies, do not easily ascend back to the source. Now imagine what happens if the body, the vessel that once carried that spark, is sealed inside the earth, buried within the same material prison from which the soul is trying to escape. To the Gnostics, this was more than a mistake. It was a cosmic tragedy. Ancient sects in Egypt, Persia, and even early Christian communities held subtle differences in their funeral rites, but the intention behind them was often distorted over time. Early mystery schools believed the body must return to the elements in a purified way, releasing the divine essence back to the higher spheres. Burial, however, was later imposed as the holy way, sanctified by institutions that wanted to control not just how we live, but how we die. Some scholars suggest that this shift coincided with the rise of centralized religion. When spiritual knowledge was turned into systems of power, the body became property of the church, and the ritual of burial became a way to reaffirm that authority. The Gnostic text, known as the Pistis Sophia, speaks of the soul's struggle after death, how it faces trials through the spheres, each guarded by hostile archons. If the soul still carries attachment to the material body, it lingers, confused and heavy, unable to rise. In contrast, if it detaches through purification, fire, prayer, or sacred knowledge, it begins to ascend. The fire, symbolic or literal, was seen as a purifier, not a punishment. It represented transformation, the same fire that burns the illusions of the ego. But when this teaching became known, it was condemned as heresy. It's no coincidence that later institutions demonized cremation, associating it with paganism or rebellion. The truth is, burning the body symbolized the soul's freedom from matter, an act that denied the demiurge his control. Burial, on the other hand, was seen by Gnostic thinkers as the final seal, the last act of submission to the world of flesh. And yet, ask yourself, why would such a belief be so dangerous? Why would the idea that a soul could be freed through fire need to be silenced? Could it be that those who rule this world, spiritually or otherwise, have always feared what humanity might become if it remembered its divine origin? Now that we've uncovered the manipulation behind burial, let's go deeper into the forgotten writings that reveal what the Gnostics really believed happens after death, and why the choice of how the body is treated determines whether the soul escapes or begins the cycle again. To understand why the Gnostics saw burial as a prison for the soul and cremation as a passage toward freedom, we must first enter their map of the afterlife, a cosmic structure as intricate as it is unsettling. According to their teachings, when a person dies, the soul does not simply go to heaven or fall into hell. Instead, it awakens in a labyrinth of invisible realms, ruled by the archons, the cosmic administrators of the demiurge. These entities are not demons in the traditional sense. They are energetic beings that feed on ignorance, fear, and attachment, the very emotions that bind the soul to the material world. When the body dies, the soul rises, but not freely. It encounters the first veil, the dense layer of the earthly atmosphere, where the echoes of emotion, regret, and desire still cling to it like chains. In Gnostic thought, this is the first test. The soul must not look back. To grieve its own body, to mourn the world, is to fall again into the grasp of the archons. Here lies one of the greatest secrets. The body is not only a vehicle for life, but also the last illusion that can pull the spirit back into the cycle of death and rebirth. Texts like the Apocryphon of John and the Hypostasis of the Archons describe how each celestial gate is guarded by rulers demanding passwords, symbols, or names, spiritual keys that only the enlightened soul possesses. These are not literal gates or passwords, but states of consciousness, moments of realization where the soul must remember what it truly is, a spark of the divine light that existed before the world was formed. But for most, this remembrance never comes. Why? Because their connection to matter and to the decaying body below keeps them bound to the illusions of the demiurge's creation. Here is where the ritual of death becomes vital. When a soul's body is buried, its energy remains magnetically tethered to the earth. The heavy matter surrounding it, the decay, the mourning of loved ones, all of it reinforces the illusion that the soul belongs to this plane. The Gnostics taught that the soul feels that pull and, unable to detach, wanders near the physical world, confused, half awake. The archons take advantage of this confusion, offering false visions of light, recycled illusions that lead the soul to reincarnate again and again. In contrast, when the body is burned, purified by fire, the Gnostics saw it as a symbol of transcendence. Fire was sacred, not destructive. It represented the divine force that transforms the material into light. Just as metals are refined in fire to reveal their essence, so too was the soul thought to rise unburdened when its physical shell was dissolved by flame. This is not to say that cremation guarantees salvation. Nothing mechanical can. But in their symbolic understanding, it aligned with the cosmic law of release, freeing the spark from the clay. The Church, of course, rejected this vision entirely. To them, resurrection required the preservation of the body, not its dissolution. But the Gnostics whispered that resurrection was never about flesh returning to life. It was about consciousness awakening from illusion, the resurrection of the spirit, not the corpse. And so, the war of symbols began. Burial became the symbol of obedience, of faith in the material order. Cremation became the symbol of rebellion, of remembering the truth that the soul was never meant to remain here. One ritual sanctified the system, the other defied it. But what if this ancient conflict was never just symbolic? What if the very energies of earth and fire truly influence the soul's journey, as the ancients believed? What if, at this very moment, the way we treat death still determines whether we awaken or return to sleep once more? In the next block, we'll uncover how these beliefs were buried, not just by time, but by deliberate design. We'll trace the moment when the early church erased the Gnostic teachings of liberation and replaced them with doctrines of submission, shaping how humanity has viewed death for nearly 2,000 years. The story of how the ancient teachings on death were lost is not a story of forgetting. It is a story of erasure. The Gnostics did not vanish because their ideas were weak or irrelevant. They vanished because their knowledge made people ungovernable. When a soul believes that its salvation lies not in temples, hierarchies, or external rituals, but in its own inner remembrance of the divine source, no institution can control it. And so, the campaign to silence them began. In the early centuries after the life of Jesus, dozens of interpretations of his words circulated across the Mediterranean. Among them were those of the Gnostics, who saw Christ not as a savior of flesh, but as a revealer of hidden wisdom, a bringer of gnosis, the knowledge that awakens the divine spark within. In their view, the resurrection he spoke of was not the physical rising of a corpse from the grave, but the spiritual awakening of a soul that remembers its origin beyond the demiurge's world. To them, Jesus was the one who had fully remembered. But this interpretation clashed with the growing power of organized religion. As the church sought to unify belief, it could not allow interpretations that bypassed its authority. A centralized system of salvation, one mediated by priests, sacraments, and dogmas, depended on the idea that souls needed the church to reach God. Gnosticism, by contrast, told people that they were already divine, that their essence came from a light higher than the heavens of the archons. In this worldview, no external power could own their fate, not in life, not in death. That is why the Gnostic understanding of death was particularly threatening. The belief that cremation, or spiritual purification through fire, could help release the soul from the material plane directly contradicted the Church's teaching of bodily resurrection. To control death was to control fear, and to control fear was to control life itself. The Church taught that the faithful should await the last judgment, when the body would rise again in glory. Burial, then, became not only a religious duty, but an act of loyalty to the system. Those who chose otherwise risked being branded as heretics, pagans, or worse, souls condemned to eternal fire. Ironically, in condemning the fire of cremation, the Church reversed its symbolism. What the ancients saw as purification, they redefined as punishment. The sacred flame that once represented liberation became hellfire, eternal suffering for disobedience. Thus, through language and fear, they inverted the ancient meaning. Fire was no longer a passage toward light, but a threat of torment. This inversion is one of the most powerful psychological manipulations in religious history, transforming a symbol of freedom into one of terror. Over the following centuries, burial became the norm across Christendom. Laws and decrees enforced it. Cemeteries grew beside churches, and the ground itself became holy, tying death to the institution forever. The ancient memory that fire releases the soul faded, replaced by the fear that it condemned it. Even today, in many cultures, cremation carries a subtle shadow of taboo, a remnant of those ancient prohibitions. But some traditions preserved fragments of the truth. In the East, fire remained sacred. Hinduism, for instance, continued to see cremation as the soul's rightful passage, a return to the source through the flames of purification. Ancient Buddhist and Zoroastrian rites echoed similar beliefs. In their rituals, the body was not desecrated but released, and the soul, unburdened, could travel toward the light realms without interference. It is no coincidence that these traditions share a view of the material world not as the ultimate home, but as a school, a dream, or even a trap. So the question arises, why did the Western world, once rich in mystical knowledge, lose this understanding? Why did the same flame revered in the East become feared in the West? The answer, as the Gnostics would say, lies in control. The demiurge's greatest triumph is not violence or suffering, it is forgetfulness. When humanity forgets its divine origin, it clings to matter, to fear, to institutions promising safety from death. But the Gnostics insisted that no ritual, no priest, no tomb could save the soul that does not know itself. The suppression of Gnostic texts was ruthless. In the 4th century, under the rule of Emperor Theodosius, laws were enacted against heresy, and countless writings were burned. What remained survived in fragments, hidden in jars, buried in sand, until discoveries like the Nag Hammadi Library in 1945 revealed them again. In those texts, we find a consistent message: do not fear death, fear ignorance. For ignorance binds the soul to the material cycle. Knowledge, true knowledge, sets it free. And so, when the Church buried the Gnostics, it buried more than heresy. It buried the path to liberation. Yet even in the silence of centuries, the truth endured, waiting for those who still listen. In the next block, we'll explore what the Gnostics actually taught about the process of liberation itself, the moment when the soul confronts the archons after death, and the secret knowledge that allows it to ascend beyond their control. The Gnostics believed that the human being is more than flesh, more than thought, more even than spirit. It is a divine spark, a fragment of the infinite source, sent into matter like a seed into soil. But the soil of this world is not pure. It is mixed with deception, governed by forces that want that spark to forget its origin. These forces are the archons, cosmic wardens serving the demiurge, who rule the planetary spheres between Earth and the true light. Every soul, upon death, must face them. To the uninitiated, this may sound like myth, but to the ancient Gnostics, it was the map of reality. When the body dies, the soul awakens in a space of subtle light, still confused by memories, still feeling the pull of the world it left behind. The archons appear as beings of dazzling radiance, but theirs is a false light, a reflection, not the source. They ask questions, they demand confessions, they test whether the soul still identifies with the body, with the name, with the illusions of power or guilt. If the soul answers from ignorance, if it still believes it is a creature of matter, it is drawn downward again, reborn into flesh, bound once more to the wheel of death and birth. But the awakened soul, the Gnostic soul, carries within it a remembrance. It knows the sacred names, not because they were taught by priests, but because they are written in its essence. These names are not words, but vibrations of consciousness, states of awareness that dissolve the illusion of each gate. When the archons whisper, "Who made you?" the soul answers not with the name of the demiurge, but with the truth, "I am from the one who was before all worlds." And the false lights recoil, unable to hold it. In texts like the books of G and Pistis Sophia, these tests are described in poetic language. Each realm corresponds to a passion the soul must overcome: fear, lust, pride, despair, attachment. The Gnostic path, therefore, was not only about knowledge, but transformation. To free oneself from the archons after death, one had to free oneself from their influence in life. Every spiritual discipline, every moment of inner silence, every act of awareness was a rehearsal for that final passage. This is where the treatment of the body after death takes on its deepest meaning. For the Gnostics, the soul's journey is affected by the lingering vibrations of matter. Burial, they said, anchors those vibrations. The decaying body becomes a magnet of memory, a weight that keeps the spirit half tethered to the physical plane. The cries of mourning, the sorrow of those left behind, all of these emotional energies create a fog that the newly freed soul must navigate. But when the body is released through fire, a different vibration occurs. Fire transmutes. It dissolves form into light, symbolizing the soul's own transformation. In the mystery schools of Egypt and later in Gnostic communities, fire was not seen as destruction, but as the mirror of the sun, the visible manifestation of the divine power that consumes illusion and reveals truth. Just as the phoenix rises renewed from its ashes, So the soul rises purified from the ashes of matter. The fire does not kill, said one forgotten teacher. It remembers for you. That phrase, found in later Coptic fragments, reflects the ancient belief that the flames serve as the soul's final reminder of its immortal nature. But the archons do not yield easily. Even in death, they whisper through the memories of the world, through guilt, fear, attachment to loved ones. Stay, they murmur. You are needed. You are not ready. Those who listen, linger. Those who doubt, return. This is why the Gnostics trained their disciples to die before dying, to meditate daily on the dissolution of the ego, to see through the illusions of identity and possession. By the time death arrived, they were already halfway home. Compare this to the dominant narrative of later centuries, where the soul was taught to wait passively, to hope for salvation from outside, to depend on intercession or ritual. The Gnostic path, by contrast, was a path of sovereignty. The soul itself was the priest, the altar, and the offering. Fire, whether external or internal, symbolized that total liberation. Yet, as time went on, these teachings were misunderstood or deliberately distorted. Fire became hell. The archons were renamed angels. The demiurge was called God. The map was inverted. Humanity forgot. And death, once seen as a gateway to freedom, became a word of terror. Now think of how this inversion affects the modern world. We fear death more than ever, yet we understand it less. We bury bodies in boxes that never decompose, sealing them from the earth as if trying to deny decay itself. We cling to permanence, to flesh, to names, everything the Gnostics warned us against. But what if remembering their teachings could change that? What if the soul's passage after death still follows the same pattern, and our rituals still echo those ancient choices between freedom and bondage? In the next block, we'll uncover how these hidden teachings mirror discoveries in modern spirituality and even near-death experiences, and how science itself, without knowing, has begun to confirm parts of the ancient Gnostic vision of what happens after the last breath. In recent decades, something extraordinary has happened. Across the world, from hospitals to laboratories, thousands of testimonies have begun to surface. People who were declared clinically dead for minutes, even hours, who later returned with vivid memories of what they experienced on the other side. Some described tunnels of light, presences of overwhelming peace, or panoramic visions of their entire life. Others described confusion, darkness, and the sense of being pulled down by unseen forces. Scientists have tried to explain these reports as chemical reactions of a dying brain, but the consistency of these experiences suggests something deeper. And when you listen closely, you hear whispers of a truth the Gnostics knew 2,000 years ago, that the journey of the soul after death is real, and that its path is determined by consciousness, by what it remembers. The Gnostics taught that when the soul leaves the body, it carries with it the vibration of its inner state. A soul filled with ignorance, guilt, and attachment remains heavy, magnetized to the world of matter. It cannot rise. A soul that has cultivated awareness, that knows it is not the body, not the name, not the story, vibrates at a higher frequency and passes through the veils more easily. This teaching resonates with modern accounts from near-death experiencers who report that the light they encounter reflects their inner truth. Those who were selfish or hateful feel a purifying intensity. Those who lived with love feel an embrace. It's not punishment or reward, it's resonance. What's fascinating is how these testimonies mirror the ancient Gnostic texts. In the Pistis Sophia, the soul ascending through the spheres faces powers that question it, each representing a distortion of consciousness, arrogance, desire, ignorance, or fear. The soul must answer not with words, but with awareness, recognizing that those forces have no true authority over it. Near-death survivors often describe something strikingly similar. They speak of a life review, a panoramic confrontation with the truth of who they are, beyond all masks. It is as if the archons of myth have become the energies of conscience and memory within the soul itself. Modern science, of course, avoids spiritual interpretations, but quantum physics, neuroscience, and consciousness research have begun to suggest that awareness may not be confined to the brain. Experiments on terminal lucidity, moments when patients regain clarity right before death, challenge the materialist view that mind dies with the body. Some researchers even speak of consciousness as a field that survives the collapse of biological form. And if consciousness survives, then perhaps the Gnostics were not wrong when they said the soul must find its way through different layers of reality, guided not by faith in an institution, but by the knowledge of what it truly is. Think of how this transforms the meaning of cremation and burial in the modern age. In a purely material view, both are physical processes, one of decay, one of combustion. But if matter holds vibration, if consciousness leaves traces, then the way we treat the body could influence the soul's release. Burial, heavy and enclosed, symbolizes continuation of attachment. Cremation, rapid and luminous, symbolizes release. Across cultures, those who practice cremation speak of returning to light, of freeing the spirit through fire. It's the same archetype, the flame as the bridge between worlds. Even within Christianity, echoes of the forgotten fire survive. The Holy Spirit appears as tongues of flame, descending to purify. The prophet Elijah rises to heaven in a chariot of fire. Christ himself says, "I came to cast fire upon the earth, and how I wish it were already kindled." What if that fire was never about destruction, but illumination, the fire of awakening that burns illusion? The Church condemned the outer fire of cremation, but preserved, perhaps unintentionally, the inner fire of spirit. The symbol was split, but the essence remained. And what of those who fear that cremation destroys the body needed for resurrection? The Gnostics would smile gently. They would say, resurrection is not reanimation. It is realization. The true resurrection happens in the moment the soul recognizes its eternal nature. The body, whether buried or burned, is but a garment, a tool used for experience. The only thing that must rise is awareness. It is remarkable how, beneath the surface of modern spirituality, these ancient truths are reawakening. Psychologists studying near-death experiences often describe a threshold of light, a point of no return where souls feel both awe and choice. Many say they were told, "It is not your time," and sent back. Others say they chose to return, sensing unfinished purpose. The Gnostics would call that threshold the border of the pleroma, the fullness of divine light. Beyond it, the archons have no power. So, what are we to make of all this? Are these parallels coincidence or memory? Fragments of a primordial knowledge returning to human consciousness after millennia of suppression? Perhaps the soul never forgets entirely. Perhaps every encounter with death, every story of near-death light, every intuition that life continues beyond the body, is the Gnostic flame trying to remind us of what we truly are. In the next block, we will step into the final mystery. What the Gnostics believed was the ultimate destiny of the liberated soul, where it goes once it escapes the archons, and what that revelation means for how we live now. Because if the soul can be freed after death, perhaps it can also begin its freedom in life. To the Gnostics, the highest goal of existence was not moral perfection, not worship, not obedience. It was remembrance. To remember who you are beyond flesh, beyond name, beyond time. They taught that all human suffering comes from forgetting that divine origin, and that death, when understood correctly, is not a punishment, but a return. Yet the path of return is filled with trials, and few make it beyond the archon's final gate. In Gnostic cosmology, beyond all heavens, beyond the stars, and the false creator's dominion, lies the pleroma, the fullness, the infinite realm of pure light from which all consciousness was born. The soul that reaches the pleroma no longer experiences division or fear. It is not absorbed or lost. Rather, it awakens to the totality of itself. In this state, it remembers that even the descent into matter, the entire human journey, was part of a cosmic drama designed to recover scattered sparks of divinity. The soul becomes one with the divine consciousness, yet retains its awareness, like a drop that knows itself as the ocean. But how does a soul reach that place? The ancient texts describe a final encounter, a moment of perfect balance between memory and surrender. The Gnostics said that the liberated soul must cast off every vestige of identity, even the identity of being a seeker or a believer. It must face the last illusion, the belief that it is separate from the source. Only when it surrenders that last veil does it pass through the blinding gate of the eons and merge with the light that no darkness can touch. This is why the Gnostic path was never about rituals alone. It was about gnosis, inner knowledge. The outer fire of cremation could symbolize the purification of matter, but the inner fire of awareness was the true liberation. The awakened ones practiced dying before death through meditation, self-inquiry, silence, and detachment from illusions. They understood that every attachment to power, to possession, to form became a chain in the afterlife. To live consciously, then, was already to prepare the soul for its ascent. Some Gnostic teachers even claimed that the liberated soul, after reaching the pleroma, could choose to return to the lower realms, not out of punishment, but compassion. They would re-enter the dream of matter to awaken others, becoming what later mystics called bodhisattvas or Christs. These souls remembered the truth, yet walked among the sleepers, carrying sparks of light into the world of shadows. To the Gnostics, this was the highest act of love, to return voluntarily to illusion in order to break it from within. When you look at this teaching, you begin to understand why it was feared. A person who no longer fears death cannot be enslaved by promises of heaven or threats of hell. They no longer bow to authority for the sake of salvation, because they know salvation is remembrance. This inner freedom terrifies systems built on control. That is why the teachings of the pleroma were buried, and why the Church offered salvation through obedience instead. The demiurge's system thrives on fear. Fear of loss, fear of sin, fear of death. But when the soul realizes that death itself is only the shedding of illusion, the power of the archons dissolves. Modern mystics, without even using Gnostic language, have rediscovered this truth. In moments of deep meditation or near-death visions, they describe an ocean of radiant presence, infinite yet intimate. Some call it God, others the source, others simply light. But the experience is always the same, a recognition that everything that ever existed is connected, that separation was never real. One experiencer said, "It was like remembering something I had known forever, that I was never born, and I could never die." That, in essence, is gnosis. The Gnostics taught that the world we see is not evil, but inverted, a mirror of the higher truth. Every birth is a descent from the pleroma, every death a chance to return. But until we awaken, the archons ensure that the mirror keeps reflecting back illusion after illusion, lifetime after lifetime. Only knowledge breaks the loop. And that knowledge begins with a question, the same question that started this video. What really happens after death? Now you can begin to see the answer forming. The ritual of death, whether burial or cremation, is not a mere custom. It is a reflection of our understanding of reality. Burial symbolizes attachment to the material world, the desire to preserve what must dissolve. Cremation symbolizes the courage to release, to let the fire of divine remembrance consume illusion. Yet even deeper, the real question is not what happens to the body, but what happens within the soul. So ask yourself, are you preparing for liberation or for return? Are you living as if this world is the ultimate reality, or as if it is the school of remembrance? And if this message resonates with you, take a moment to pause, to feel the part of you that knows you are more than flesh, more than thought. That spark within you has no tune, no flame, no ending. Because next, we'll reach the final revelation, the conclusion that ties together everything the Gnostics tried to tell us about life, death, and the secret of freedom. Stay with me until the end, because this truth isn't just about dying. It's about awakening while still alive. So now you know what was buried beneath centuries of silence, a truth older than any temple and stronger than any doctrine, that death is not the end, and the way we face it reveals the state of our consciousness. To the Gnostics, the real question was never what happens after we die, but what happens before we remember who we are. Because if the soul can awaken while still clothed in flesh, death becomes not a door of fear, but a passage of light. The Gnostics taught that liberation begins in life. Every moment we detach from illusion, from greed, anger, pride, or despair, we loosen the chains that the archons will later try to use against us. Every time we act with awareness instead of instinct, we reclaim a piece of our divine memory. And when the final moment comes, the soul that has practiced this remembrance does not tremble before the false lights of the demiurge. It recognizes their trick, smiles, and passes through untouched. The flame that would have consumed it instead becomes the flame that frees it. In the end, the body returns to dust or to fire, but the body was never you. Whether buried or burned, it is only a symbol of your consciousness. The real purification is internal. Fire and earth are mirrors of two states of being, the fire that transforms and rises, or the earth that clings and buries. That is why the Gnostics said that the greatest choice of all is not between burial or cremation, but between ignorance and remembrance. This is what the demiurge never wanted you to know, that the power to ascend lies within your own awareness. That salvation cannot be bought, nor granted, nor denied, because it is already in you. The archons can tempt you, distract you, confuse you, but they cannot imprison a soul that knows itself. A single spark of remembrance is brighter than all their false lights combined. And the moment you remember that you are light, not the reflection, but the source, their hold dissolves. So the next time you stand beneath the sky and feel small, remember, you are not looking at heaven. You are made of it. You are the same essence that moves the stars and gives breath to all living things. The prison was never outside. It was the veil drawn across your own sight, and every moment of awareness tears that veil a little more. If this revelation has stirred something within you, a memory, a question, a faint echo of recognition, then you are already beginning to awaken. And that awakening is contagious. Each person who seeks truth lights a flame that helps others find their way through the darkness. That's why I invite you to be part of this circle of remembrance. Subscribe to this channel, not as a mere viewer, but as a seeker who keeps alive the memory of the ancient knowledge. Comment what you felt while listening. What part of this hidden truth resonated most with you? Your voice helps others see that they are not alone in their search. Like the Gnostics of old, we are scattered sparks learning to remember together. Each like, each comment, each share is a torch passed from soul to soul, a rebellion against the silence imposed on us for centuries. And as you finish this video, ask yourself quietly, am I ready to awaken while I'm still alive? Because the truth is simple. You don't have to wait for death to be free. The fire that purifies the soul is already burning inside you. It's the fire of awareness, the eternal light of Gnosis. Let it rise.